Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Post Game here on the Cyclone Fanatic social media feeds. You can follow us. You're already following us on social media. I'd like to push everybody to our YouTube page as well, CFTV. We're starting to do a lot more of that stuff. We'll have complete coverage for you after the game. Jared Stansbury, Jacqueline Cordova, and Connor Ferguson are all at Matt Campbell's press conference right now. I'll give you some reaction, but before I do, I want to thank our sponsors, Carl Chevrolet and Centurion Stone of Iowa. Actually head to Centurion Stone this week to shoot a commercial that we'll have to run for you guys, show you all the great things that my friends at Centurion Stone of Iowa do for you. And they just did my living room, actually. It looks phenomenal. Of course, Carl Chevrolet, you know what they can do for you. Carl Auto Group, they are all over the great state of Iowa now. More than just Chevys. All right. This is a really crazy game. I could probably do a good hour for you here just talking about it. Feel free to put your comments. I want this to be as interactive as possible. I'll read your comments for those people listening on the podcast feed as well. Let's start through. And I do think that the box score is probably a little bit deceiving. Iowa State racked up some yards there at the end of the game. The total yardage looks Baylor 361 to 350 for Iowa State. Again, I think that's a little deceiving. Iowa State really was, I thought, in the second half by pretty much every aspect of the football game. The second half did not go the way I thought it would. I was wrong. Hunter Deckers really struggled in the second half. Iowa State, it kind of started because they weren't able to run the football, right? I mean, you average 2.4 yards per carry, and Jairo Brock had a 37-yard run there, so that was bumped up a little bit because of that. The last time I had looked at it before that run, it was 1.7. So you really are really struggling on the ground to get things going. Listen, at some point, you just got to give Baylor credit too, right? I think John Haycock called a pretty good start to the second half, and Blake Shapen, the quarterback at Baylor, just kept completing really tough plays. And he made some key throws. Iowa State's quarterback didn't. I think Shapen proved today what I kind of thought in the offseason when I had Baylor in my preseason number one in the Big 12, that he beat out the other guy for a reason. And he looked really good, made some key throws, 19 of 26. I think Iowa State's linebackers probably had a bit of a reality check today. Love to go watch him back the tape. It looked like Dave Aranda and that staff had a really good game plan to attack the middle and Iowa State's linebacking core. I thought the corners were great. The secondary played pretty good. Clearly, you missed Bo Freeler. We'll get to the penalties and the questionable calls we'll get to that here coming up. But, yeah, I mean, Baylor, I'll give them credit. They made clutch play after clutch play. Looks like 2 for 3 on fourth down. They went 5 of 12 on third down. I would have thought that they were actually better on third down. It felt like that watching the game. But Iowa State, you turned the ball over a couple times there in the half. One of them was as good of a punt. I would have liked to seen Iowa State, I guess, go downfield more. I thought it took them a little bit too long to start pushing, right? I think that I get it that they wanted to get that running game going, trying to get the, open it up like that, but it just wasn't there. It's a little bit deceiving and hard to say, well, did that start at the end because of Iowa State, or was it because Baylor was in a more relaxed defense, which is certainly possible as well. You'd have to go back and watch that. Smarter Football will be able to tell me that. But I would have liked to seen Iowa State just be more aggressive. It feels like this offense is meant to go down field like that, right? Like that game I thought was called a little bit like some of the plays, some of the stuff we saw last year, where this defense or this offense is just fundamentally built differently, right? And listen, we'll get to the officiating stuff, but Iowa State just made too many mistakes. They weren't good enough to beat a team like Baylor when Baylor was making those plays. And Iowa State just it seemed like time and time again, when we'll get to the calls, the elephant in the room, you do ask yourself, because there were, I thought, 3 really, really bad calls in the game, right? So you have the one that gets Bo Freeler knocked out, which is just ridiculous. And I talked about this a little bit at halftime, but in case you weren't on with us, there's got to be something in college football that allows some discretion. He shouldn't have been ejected from that football game for that hit. And I would argue he should not have had a penalty. They called it a penalty. And then a lot of you are yelling at me on here saying, well, where were Baylor's target? None of those should have been targeted. And that's the problem in college football, is that we have a sport here where these officials, there's just no consistency. Not only across the sport, there's no consistency in the same game, right? And so you had the bad targeting, you had the unsportsmanlike penalty that may have even been worse afterwards. And then you had, I thought the worst call of the day was the Anthony Johnson pick play thing, where the below the waist thing, where he hit him in like the shoulders, right? Like, it's really frustrating, because you look at it and you go, well, if you don't spot them the 14, right, because those calls bailed Baylor out, they get touchdowns on each of those drives, then is Iowa State having to press and come from behind? And that's a fair question to ask, right? Now, granted, those things did happen. So then you've got to be able to get off the field on 4th down. You've got to be able to complete on, 3rd and short. You've got to be able to do those things, where Iowa State just didn't do it enough today. They didn't do it enough. And Baylor's guy, under duress, Will McDonald in his face, is completing 3rd and longs, right? And that was the difference in the second half. 2 things can be true, right? 2 things can be true. Like, they can be really bad calls, and then you can also get outplayed in the second half, which Iowa State did. It's unfortunate. It just really, really you hate to see that, because we're all sitting here thinking the same thing, right? Like, what if? The macro thing when I look at this is I just see that Kansas just beat Duke. You look at next week, and you look at the rest of this Big 12, and this is a meat grinder of a league this year, right? So Baylor was my number 1 team in the Big 12 going into the season, which I feel a little bit better about that now than I did before the game. I was talking to some Baylor reporters, and I think I would have before the game. I haven't been overly impressed with the Bears. This was an impressive win to come into Ames. Nobody's won here since 2019, I think is what it was. So this was an impressive win for them. But like, think about it this way: who's the worst team? Is West Virginia? Is Texas Tech? Like, I don't know. Whoever it is, like, the difference between whatever that is and Baylor, let's assume Baylor's number 1 right now, or Oklahoma's it's not big. So again, you can't make the mistakes Iowa State did today and win many of these Big 12 games, because the margin's going to be so thin. Like, there's not going to be a big difference between 10-2 and 7-5, or even 6-6, God forbid. Right? I hope you guys get what I'm saying with this. This is going to be a really, really stressful season one way or another. There was a great stat. I want to give a shout out to the guy who put the stat up on Twitter, Spencer. One second. Sorry. I want to make sure I give him props. Spencer Hughes on Twitter posts Iowa State's last 6 losses. 8 of his last 9 losses have come by 7 points or fewer. Like, that's crazy. And that shows you, again, just the way that this team's playing, the way that this team plays football. Lower possessions, fewer possessions, but you can't afford, they didn't have the monumental breakdown. There wasn't other than the flea flicker, right? The flea flicker was devastating. That was kind of the backbreaker, I thought, today for Baylor. But just think about it. You didn't have that monster punt return or block punt or anything like that, but just you kept kicking yourself one after another. Claire chimes in that Baylor could have been called for 3 targeting penalties. They could have, but they wouldn't have been the right calls. And that's what's frustrating to me. They could have. You're right, Claire. Same thing that Bo Freeler got kicked out of the game for. It doesn't make any sense. But this is college football. There's no consistency. And I see a lot of you, and I agree with you. You're saying, I just want consistency. So do I. I'm telling you, you're not going to get it. Okay? It's just the way that it happens. So, listen, I thought that Baylor's quarterback, man, he comes in and made play after play into rest. You got to give that kid a hand. Baylor's defense really shuts down Iowa State's running game today. And Iowa State's got to be able to run the football better to win a lot of these Big 12 games. And I don't think this is a panic game. I know it's not a panic game today. You know, the defending champs beat you by a touchdown, right? Next week, though, gets a little nerve-wracking. Like, that was a game you had penciled in as a win. Is that now? I would project Iowa State will be a 3 to 6 point favorite in that. And if you lose that, and if you go 0-2 there, then you start to right, you start to freak out just a little bit. So next week got a lot more nerve-wracking today. I think that's where I'll wrap this thing up today, because I want to be sure to highlight the coverage that Jared and Jacqueline and Connor are going to have for us. But yeah, next week gets really dicey, no doubt about that. We'll have complete coverage for you all week. Bloom and I will we'll have the podcast coming up tomorrow night. Appreciate all of you. I hope you have a beautiful day here in Iowa. Get home safely if you're watching from your car, hanging out in the lots, whatever. We couldn't do any thing that we do here without you guys, and we just really, really appreciate you guys continuing to tune in and supporting our sponsors and whatnot. So thank you. Iowa State loses this one 20 – I don't even know the score. Yeah, you know, they lost 31-24. Thank you to Carl Chevrolet, Carl Auto Group for their continued support. Thank you to my friends at Centurion Stone of Iowa. Adam, my man. Yeah. Cheers to the great locks so far. We're 9-2-1 on the year, baby. Let's keep it up, baby. James tuning in from South Carolina down by Myrtle Beach. Appreciate you, James. Great. Appreciate all of you, man. We couldn't do any of this without all of you. We're not doing anything special here. We have a great community and we have great sponsors, and we just are so grateful, and we thank you every single day. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening on the podcast feed, and we'll be around. Get after it, baby.